Mr. Chidambaram, this is Nitin Sareen, and I'm engaged in my own chocolate manufacturing homemade business, homemade chocolate manufacturing. You see, if in India, if anybody wants to survive, whether to take example of a politician or a businessman, anybody, any MNC, you have to cater to mass market. You have to take a due consideration of the requirements of a common man. And on one side, I see that take the late example of Nandigram and the POSCO project. POSCO problem with POSCO is that it is facing a problem of land acquisition. So you have dual responsibility. On one side, you have the responsibility to lure foreign investment, thereby to help the economy grow. And on the other hand, you have to take care of the consent of the left parties and of the common man. Because these are the actually people who help in electing a new government. Everything is being controlled by them. So I want to know how you strike the balance between both of them.
Try to explain. It's not easy because the current state of politics, the very large number of regional parties in a coalition or supporting a coalition have necessarily to defend their interests, their political interests, and their state's interests. And when they do so, they come into conflict with other regional parties or other coalition partners, or they come into conflict with sound economics. Therefore, the task of forging or weaving a policy out of these different strands of opinion is not an easy task. Take your SEZ policy. Now, the avowed policy of the West Bengal government is to promote industry. And we all know that industry requires land. But when they promote industry, and in this case, they are promoting private capital as well as foreign capital investment, which is a sign of the maturing of that political party. But they run into conflict with sections of their own people, and they run into conflict with those who espouse the interest of the classes that are affected. When you take land from farmers, you run into conflict with the owners of the farmland in your own state. You also run into conflict with civil society, which espouses the cause of the owners of the farmland. And then to weave a policy make a policy in this atmosphere is not very easy. It's all right for Mr. Shankaraya to say the GOM did not resolve the issues of SEZ. It's the media which resolved the issues of SEZ.
Sir, I protest. I didn't say we resolved. We debated it. My limited point was that there was no debate.
Yeah. Perhaps the GOM should put out a newsletter at the end of every meeting.
It would help transparency.
We also debate. But the point is, no GOM, no cabinet can share its debates with the people. We can only share the conclusion. And it's not easy to reach a conclusion when there are so many interests clashing with each other. If we reach a conclusion, we shall certainly share it. When we reached a conclusion about, the FAB policy, we shared it with the people. When we reached a conclusion about merging Indian Airlines and Air India, we shared it with the people. But we are unable to reach a conclusion yet on the SEZ policy. And what do we share? No GOM, no cabinet can come and tell the world, we have debated, we have not come to a conclusion. We can only share a conclusion. But I think one must show a great deal of empathy for the political process that we are working today. This is a new process. And this is a very difficult process. It's only when you are part of the process, you know how difficult it is to work this process.
Mr. Khorakiwala.
Sir, you mentioned in one of your 5 major agenda, the inclusive growth. And we have seen the benefit of economic liberalization over the last 15 years. And in your budget, I think for the first time we saw a great emphasis on education, health, agriculture, rural development in terms of providing the funding and the provision for the same. But I think there is also another aspect that the way economic liberalization have taken place in terms of policy changes, in terms of the structure, I think in the social sector, there has not been any change in this country for last 40 or 50 years significantly in the structure and the policy. And I think if we have to bring about the ongoing inclusive growth, you have taken some initiative with the ITIs, but I think many other areas where government-public partnership or public-private partnership or the structural issues where to establish a school. For example, morning paper suggested in Haryana there are about 25 lakh students who have been going to school and because they did not follow certain rules and there is the schools will be closed down. I think, therefore, we would like to suggest that the government need to look at the structural reforms even in the social sector. Your comments, sir.
You see, when you talk about government, I assume you talk about central government, state government, and municipal government. Many of these issues cannot be addressed by the central government. Many of these issues have to be addressed at the state level and at the sub-state level. Where the issues are being addressed at the state and sub-state level, there is tangible progress. Why are poverty proportions very different from state to state? Why are literacy figures different from state to state? Why is infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate widely different among the states? It is because at the state level and sub-state level, these issues have either been addressed or not addressed. To ask the central government to take responsibility to address these issues is asking the central government to do the impossible. Let's take literacy in education. How is it that Kerala achieves 100% literacy? And why is it that a state like UP still has 1 million children every year who attain the age of 5 years and do not enter a class? 1 million children every year in the state of Uttar Pradesh do not enter school. So I think these are issues which have to be addressed at the state level, sub-state level. The only way is to improve the quality of governance. People must hold those whom they elect to govern accountable. If they don't hold them accountable, how will governance improve? There's no question that governance has improved in many states where there was poor governance. But there are still large areas of country which are very poorly governed at the state level and more importantly at the sub-state level. In fact, we have not paid enough attention to district administration. That is the cutting edge of governance. If you can deliver a sound school system, a sound system of primary health centers, a sound system for distributing drinking water, building connecting roads at the district level, not only will the quality of life improve for people, but there'll be so much economic activity generated by this that India's growth rate can be propelled to a higher plane. Therefore, we must ask ourselves the question, what is the quality of people we are electing at sub-state and state level, and not only look at Parliament and the Government of India. There's so much to be done at the state level and the sub-state level.
I'm Nitin Shukla. Sir, do you think we need to take a fresh look at central, state and concurrent list of subjects to ensure accelerated and inclusive growth, particularly since the list was drawn 50, 60 years back and probably it needs a fresh look?
See, there are two contrary pulls today in the polity. One section believes that since states are neglecting their responsibilities, the center must take over more and more responsibility in that area. Example, primary education, primary health care. These are subjects which always were entirely within the state jurisdiction. But today we have Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, we have the midday meal scheme, we have the NRHM, all driven by the center, because after patiently putting up with state neglect, civil society is demanding, and sections of the polity are demanding, that the center take over greater responsibility for these functions. The other strand of opinion is that the center has no business in these areas, and in fact the center should shed some of its responsibilities in favor of the state. For example, the states are demanding that the right to levy service tax must be taken away from the center and given to the states. The states are demanding that in many areas of governance, the center must wash its hands off, just hand over the money to the states, and the states must implement it. Now, I think that this debate has not reached a final conclusion. But over the last 10 years, my assessment is that more and more the debate is swinging in favor of those who want the center to play a more active role. In fact, every new program of the center, you will notice in the last 10 years, has been in areas which traditionally and constitutionally belong to the states. We are now taking over even rural electrification. The Rajiv Gandhi Vidyutikaran Yojana is rural electrification. NRHM is basic medical care through a trained health worker in the village. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Take midday meal scheme. The midday meal scheme was introduced by Kamaraj in Tamil Nadu when there was no question of the center playing any role. Entirely designed, funded and implemented by a state government. Today the entire midday meal scheme is driven by the central government. I don't know how the center will be able to manage all these responsibilities, but if you ask civil society, they will tell you that since the states have neglected it, it is now the duty of the center to take over these responsibilities.
Mr. Bajaj and Mr. Amarnath.
Mr. Finance Minister, we recognize the reality of the coalition politics. But what we are concerned about is that while the majority cannot suppress or ignore the minority partners, the minority cannot ignore or suppress the majority. And, we find, and our perception is that the tail is wagging the dog and not the other way around. And especially when the chief minister of the minority body seems to be in consonance with the three aces we consider, the PM, you, and the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. So we have tremendous hopes. And can industry help you in this? Thank you.
Do you want to join the coalition?
Well, certainly industry can help. It stops complaining about a little tweaking of a tax rate here or a tax rate there.
I think you asked for it. Mr. Amarnath, the last question.
Industry is doing well. I've repeatedly said it. Industry is doing well, and let me offer once again my congratulations to industry. The service sector is doing well. Let me offer my congratulations to the service sector. You are able to attract investment. You are able to attract technology. You are inventive. You are innovative. You are willing to break with tradition and experiment with new forms of corporate governance. Families are willing to shed their responsibilities and hand over to professional managers. All this is a sign of industry maturing, and that maturing of industry is bringing huge profits and huge dividends to industry. You've earned it, keep it. But when government turns its attention to some sectors which are being neglected, they are our own people. And for that purpose, we need to raise some money. I think industry must willingly share that burden. No heavy burden has been put on industry. In fact, I've repeatedly said, and privately publicly and within the cabinet, I am betting on growth. And I'm betting on growth to be driven by industry and the services sector. Why would I do anything to affect growth? Without this growth, where is the question of inclusive growth? Without growth, where is the question of inclusive growth? And without growth, where is the question of funding inclusive growth? So I want industry to recognize that there are compulsions which require us to address sections of people who have been neglected. And when we do so, and we do increase the burden to some extent upon industry, industry must willingly bear that burden, number one. Number two, industry must also recognize that it has a role to play in macroeconomic stability. You can't look at only your balance sheets. I mean, around March 15, have a habit of looking at balance sheets. And I'm very happy to see the very healthy growth of balance sheets. However, beyond your balance sheet, you'll have to play a role in macroeconomic stability. The one thing that is affecting, or to some extent throwing a spanner in the works as far as macroeconomic stability, is core inflation. And I've said this before and I want to say this again. Please don't allow core inflation to be entrenched. In the last week for which we have figures, the rate of inflation for primary articles has moved down. The rate of inflation for fuel, power and lighting has moved down. The rate of inflation for the manufacturing sector is moving up. And therefore, it is an industry's interest, in the long-term interest of industry, to please pay some attention to the role you can play in macroeconomic stability. That's the best you can do. The best you can do is recognize that beyond your balance sheets, you have a role for macroeconomic stability. And if you will be kind to me a little more, that's the best role you can play.
Mr. Amarnath.
I'm Amarnath from Nimrana Hotels. While we try and do everything right as we can, and we are hugely appreciative of the 9% growth, what I think people here are they're not suggesting 9% growth without the government, but perhaps with a better government. And I think that in this case, the bureaucracy's role is very important, because they very often operate as if they were a law unto themselves. And when we are harassed, or when there is they demand corruption of us and we don't back them, then everything comes to a standstill. So I've heard you say that we shouldn't encourage corruption, but if your electricity is cut, if you don't get licenses, what are you supposed to do? It's not just the 9%. I think it could be 15% also, if we have good governance and a bureaucracy that's answerable.
I think, I think it's unfair to paint the whole bureaucracy with the same brush. I think a bureaucracy is like a horse. A horse is as good as a rider. If you know to ride your horse, you can get things done. It's only when you don't know to ride a horse, I don't know if the horse takes you for a ride, I suppose.
So does the growth rate.
Yeah. Now, having said that, I recognize that we cannot cleanse the stables by simply a fiat or a diktat. That is why the government has given you means the citizen, powerful instruments to assert your rights. The Consumer Redressal Forum is extremely active these days. The Right to Information Act, public interest litigation. These are powerful instruments that are available to you under the law today to expose corruption, to expose inefficiency. It's the way you use these instruments. I would urge you to use these instruments to expose the bureaucracy, expose governance failures, and expose corruption. But I don't think we should plead helplessness. Today, individual in society is far more empowered than what an individual 20 years ago was. 20 years ago, could you have imagined an individual demanding information from government? Could you have imagined anyone going to a consumer forum and getting an award because his baggage was lost by an airline, or because his, some information was refused to him, or his passport was delayed? Today, I think individual is more empowered. But I think you should use this power to place a check on the bureaucracy and place a check on ministers and government.